January 16th, 1993, and we are at the United Nations Plaza here. There's a demonstration going on by the Greek community to prevent the name of Macedonia being used by the Yugoslavians. One of the reasons why I believe so many people are upset here as Greeks is the fact that so many Greek people have sacrificed for the United States. World War I and World War II, the Greeks were allies to America. There are only one of 4 countries that fought on the side of the United States as allies in World War I and II. Turkey, of course, was on the side of the Germans in World War I and II, and the Greeks have a sense of betrayal, especially as it relates to Turkey and the invasion of Turkey on the island of Cyprus in July of 1974. So the Greeks have been upset, feeling betrayed, that all their sacrifice. Many historians believe that the Greek resistance in May of 1941 against the Germans, whereby the Italians in October of 40 were unable to take Greece, that the Greeks are justified in feeling that America should come to their aid for the thousands of men, women, and children that were lost in the bitter resistance against the Germans, whereby the Germans were unable to penetrate into Moscow and Russia until the winter of 41, thus slowing down their timetable and their plans for being and occupying Russia in the summer of 41. This great sacrifice should be honored, I believe, here in front of the United Nations, where the vote will be taking place Monday by the members of the United Nations.
Macedonia has been Greek for 3,000 years. Alexander the Great, in the history books, everybody knows internationally that was a Greek man. So who is these people that are coming now to steal away our history, our name? Who gives them the right? The UN? If the UN decides to create a new Macedonia, it decides to create a new world. Already we have too many wars internationally. I don't think the world is ready to face another Iraq. And better American people get educated, to whom Macedonia belongs. Macedonia is Greek land, always has been Greek. 3,000 years history. Every history book in every language of this world, they know Macedonia has been Greek and will stay that way. Greek people all over the world will make sure it will stay that way.
There are 3 things the Greeks are asking. First, to take the wording out of the Skopjean constitution to that requires that demands that they acquire eventually the Greek part of Macedonia. The Greek province called Macedonia, they want it, and it's in their constitution in writing. We request that they take that out. We also request that they stop the propaganda criticizing Greece of being undemocratic and basically trying to prevent this. And third, to change the name. There are 3 things we require. The third thing is to change the name. Don't use that name Macedonia, because they do not go back 4,000 years the way we do. I was personally born in Katerini. I was born in Macedonia. I was born 15 minutes away from where King Philip's tomb was found. I am a true Macedonian and I am Greek, and they are not. Thank you.
I'm an American Greek.
Okay, and you fought in the Korean War, you said?
Yes, I fought in the Korean War. 3 brothers, we all went to Korea. And we fought for this country, but our descent is Greek. And we love Greece, and we want to be a free country, and the name of Macedonia is not for sale. And we fought to help it physically, or anywhere we're going to defend it, as American Greeks.
So what you're saying is, as a Greek immigrant here, you fought for the United States in the Korean War. You know that the Greeks sent troops for the United States in the Korean War, and you feel funny.
Very strong to support the Greek cause. and not to create another Lebanon. Because we try to do now a country which has not never existed, we try to create. And yet countries, we are in existence, we try to crush them. Why? If we believe in democracy and the right of a human being, the Turks, they're fighting for 50 years. What happened to them? They're not in existence? In a country never existed, we try to create.
What you're saying is that it's illegal, the idea that Yugoslavia would steal the name of Macedonia.
Not Yugoslavia, the people there, the territory, they want to create a country, Macedonia.
By stealing the Greek name.
The Greek name. The name Macedonia always was a Greek for 4,000 years. Why suddenly somebody else wanted to steal it? That means they have something behind it. To take the whole territory. This is not start today. This is start many years ago. The Treaty of St. Stephanos in 1872, when the Russians wanted to create the big Bulgarian country. They gave Bulgaria from the Black Sea all the way to Macedonia. And the Bulgarians, they had a dream that. And Tito, he took the same idea in 1942 to create the same thing.
So what you're saying is Tito and Stalin during World War II developed the idea for the very first time in history that a part of Yugoslavia should have the name Macedonia, with expansionist ideas for Salonika.
Salonika, all Macedonia.
Why don't you tell me about your grandparents who you say suffered and thousands were slaughtered in the Pontos region, which is now in Turkey. Why don't you tell us about that?
I will. My parents came in this country in 1912. They came from Pontos, Turkey, with a name they called Trapezus, the town. They slaughtered the Turks, genocide, 350,000 Greeks from 1915 to 1922. My father came here and he served in this country World War I, and his children served in the Korean War, and his grandchildren, they probably serve in another war. I am here now with the fourth generation of Greeks, with my grandson. Any farther you want to go? It's 4 generations.
Why don't you tell the American audience, they probably don't know about 1912. The Turkish people, I understand, the Armenians, they slaughtered over 1 million Armenians on April 30th, 1915. Then what happened?
They slaughtered them, they left them. The Turkish never was a friend of the United States. Always was the opposition. It was with the Germans. And yet, we tried to make them as our friends. Turkey never going to be our friend. She is opportunist. If she used the opportunity to go against us, she's going to do it again. And they slaughter, you see, genocides the Armenians, the Greeks, the Turks, everybody. So, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, the Americans, I hope they take the right stand to help the right cause.
Could you say something, since you were in the Korean War in the United States military uniform, could you say something about World War II and what happened? In your opinion, you feel justified again because Greece stopped the Germans from advancing and prevented them from entering Russia in the summer of '41. Could you talk about what you remember? Were you a child during that time?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I was in Greece. I was outside of Salonika, I born. And the Greeks, at that time, everybody was praising us, that they say that the gods fight like Greeks and not the Greeks like gods. And suddenly, we became the enemy. The Greeks, I think, they helped a lot in World War II, the Allies. It was the only country who fought the enemy. France in 2 weeks, Poland in 2 weeks, Yugoslavia didn't stand at all. And Greece lasted from October to May. Which other country stopped? 1940 to 41. Which other country stopped it? Tell me. Nobody else but Greece.
So that's why you feel justified again today that Greece has suffered so many losses to contribute to the Allied victory in World War II.
I think he gave a nice cause and it stands for itself. The Greeks, they always was with the Allies from World War I and always was a friend of the United States. So I can't see now why suddenly we want to take a step in the other way. So for me, I think we should help the Greek cause.
The quote that you just gave was from Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill also said that if the Greeks stop the Germans, they will be rewarded with the reunification of the island of Cyprus with Greece. Do you remember that? Do you want to comment on Churchill's words?
I remember very vaguely. I don't remember at all, but I read about it, that in case the Allies win the war, Greece is rewarded with Cyprus and the Totokanis, the 12 islands, which we got the 12 islands, but Cyprus, the English, they gave us trouble. Somehow they don't want to take it. And they create the minority of Turkey. So they figure they...
Can you comment a little bit on the reports that we hear that somehow the English, after World War II, supplied weapons and gold litters to both the leftists and the rightists in the Greek Civil War?
That's what they say. I didn't see it. Even if I was in the mountains, I didn't see it. But they say that the English supply both sides. And most of it, they help create a problem in Greece, so Greece is not be stable. That, yes.
Public to realize and to remember how closely Greece has worked with the forces of democracy in the Balkans and the Greek contribution in World War II. Greece is a friend of the United States. I think the United States owes Greece and democracy a deeper understanding of the Greek position. Coming from the area of Macedonia myself, from Thessaloniki, I think it is very important to realize that the Macedonian state represented by Skopje is a construct of Soviet expansionism in the area. Greece should not pay a price for Soviet expansionism. It has already paid too much of a price in World War II and the Civil War. It is also important, I think, for the American public to remember that the recognition of Skopje with a significant Albanian Muslim population might destabilize the entire region by giving the room or ground for a split between the population, for an igniting conflict in Kosovo and neighboring Albania.
In Florida, Greece, northern part of Greece. I'm living now in Philadelphia. What I want the American public to realize is that we don't have anything against the people of Skopje. We want them to be free. We want them to be independent. We congratulate them for their independence. All we want them is not to steal our culture, not to steal our name. Macedonia is Greek, and we want to be their friends as long as they keep their own identity, they keep their own name. I think they were named the Republic of Vardar. And I think one reason why the confusion is very simple. Macedonia is a big region, and many people can call themselves Macedonians, but the name of that region comes from ancient Macedonia that gave its name to the region, and that historical connection is Greek. Everybody knows that. If we don't want to create another Middle East conflict in the Balkans, we have to keep the issues clear. We have to avoid confusion. And I think the American government and the American people have to realize that by keeping things simple and clear and true to their historical identity, they are going to help avoid conflict in the Balkans and avoid creating another Middle East problem there. So we are pro-peace and we are in favor of the people of Skopje for their independence, but we will not accept any kind of stealing our traditions and our name for a very, unfortunately, expansionistic intent.
Laughter. All right, laughter. Okay. All right, you want to talk about the misrepresentation? I like that. What else?
Actually, I come personally from Thessaloniki, which is northern Greece, Macedonia. And my mother's family comes from the region of Nausa, which is about 50 miles to the west in northern Greece. I've been personally told a great deal of vivid descriptions about the suffering that both my grandparents and my parents went through during the very troublesome historical times of the Balkan Wars and onwards. So I feel very personally touched about this issue, and very strongly I come here to protest and express my opinion that Macedonia is Greece, and certainly I do not like to be to feel threatened by some people from the north, the Skopjans from the north, who come and claim not only our historical heritage, but at the same time claim territories from the part of Greece which is called Macedonia. My father's family came from eastern Thrace, from a small village outside Istanbul, and we came to the region of Macedonia after the exchange of populations during the unfortunate war of 1922, and father participated in the war of 1922, and he was imprisoned for several months, and he escaped and walked all the way back to Macedonia from Asia Minor. And all our family, and we have relatives that have participated in the liberation of Macedonia from in the war against Turkey in 1912. So we have plenty of people that sacrificed themselves for this freedom that we enjoy now.
Who had your grandfather in jail for several months during that time?
Oh, that was the Turkish authorities during the war in 1922. And also I have relatives who played active part in, we call them the Macedonian fighters, who fought in 1905 to 1912 for the liberation of northern Greece.
And northern Greece, Macedonia, was liberated October 21st, 1912.
Yes.
And your family participated and
Yes.
suffered many
Yes.
deaths there.
Communists of Stalin and Tito and Gligorov are not Macedonians, and no matter what, they are not going to be at the conscience of the civil people. Macedonia is over 3,000 years Greece and will be Greek forever. They have to stop our bodies to take even an inch of our country. We're concerned about that country as much as concerned about the United States. We are Greek Americans. We're concerned about the United States. We're concerned about our birth country. We want the civil people to know that we don't want war. We are sick of war. The whole world knows that we are sick of war. We want peace. But like the ancient Greeks say, molon lave, if they want to take even a quarter of inch of our land, they have to step on our dead bodies.
Θα κερδίσουμε, δεν υπάρχει περίπτωση να τους αναγνωρίσουμε και δεν υπάρχει περίπτωση ποτέ να γίνει τέτοιο έγκλημα στη νεωτέρα ιστορία. Θα κερδίσουμε. Σας αξίζουν συγχαρητήρια.
σου είπα την άλλη φορά. Κοίταξε ένα παράδειγμα, κάτσε να μην φαίνεται. Αυτό εδώ πέρα είναι το Washington. Βλέπεις ότι...
Well, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Church of Constantinople, was the church which made the Hellenic nations survive under the yoke, under the Ottoman, the Turkish yoke, and it was the Orthodox Church which supported human rights throughout the Turkish occupation. If it was not for the Orthodox Church, the Greek nation would not exist right now. It was our ecumenical patriarch in Constantinople, Patriarch Gregory V, was the one that blessed the Greek Revolution, and from that point on we have liberty.
Is that Aya Lavra, the Bishop Patros Germanos?
That's Bishop Germanos of Patras, Greece, who blessed the Greek Revolution in Greece proper on March 25th, 1821.
Why don't you tell us what's referred to as the secret school, the role of the secret school?
That was the church in itself instituted secret education because under Turkish occupation the Greek language was prohibited to be used. So the Greek monasteries and churches would supply the education for the occupied Greek people, teaching them Greek in the churches and in secret meetings during nighttime, during the after Vesper services.
And what do you see going on today in the role of the church in preserving Greek history?
The role of the church is instrumental, no question about it. Without it, especially nowadays, Orthodoxy once more is being called to preserve all Orthodox people throughout the whole world, because it's not just the Greek people. We're talking about 250 million Orthodox throughout the world. And as you know very well, we are going through very terrible times throughout Europe. And the Greek Orthodox Church will be there to propagate faith, freedom, and peace and love throughout the region, and our traditions, of course.
Is it true that some of the revolutionaries were priests and actually took up arms? Can you explain that?
They stopped serving as priests, but they continued serving their country, participating in the Greek Revolution, like Papaflesis, Athanasios Diakos, various clergymen that took up arms. That's not something, of course, that the church advocates, but they had to participate because they voluntarily gave up their ministry to participate in the Greek struggle.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can you show the whole crowd from that angle? We are here today in Tarpon Springs, Florida, which in 1905 was a very busy center for Greek immigrants who came basically from the island of Kalymnos to start the sponge business. We are gathered here today to begin the parade for Greek Independence Day, which will begin in front of the Greek Orthodox Church here, commemorating 1821 when the Greek Revolution began, which threw off 400 years of Turkish Muslim occupation and slavery. The Greek Revolution, it was important because it allowed for the rest of Europe to free itself from the Turkish Muslim yoke, which reached up as far as almost Austria, Vienna, with a mega battle that took place in 1369 in present-day Yugoslavia. And that is why today we have so many problems in Yugoslavia, as it is broken up into 5 provinces between Christians, Catholics, Greek Orthodox, Serbian Orthodox, Muslims, Albanians, this powder keg that goes back to the Balkan Wars, where the Turks dominated northern Greece and that whole region up until 1904. And it wasn't until 1912 that Salonika, the capital of the northern province of Greece called Macedonia, was liberated on October 26, 1912. So μπορείς να πεις κάτι για αυτό,
για τον πατέρα.
Για να πεις και κάτι για τον άντρα σου από την Πόντο.
Το πει αυτή, εγώ δεν το ξέρω.
Yes, well, my dad was from Pontos, and he remembered very well. He was 7 years old, and the Turks came into their town.
What year do you think that was?
Probably my dad was born 1905. Maybe it was, well, okay, 1906, maybe 1912, because he had to be about 10 years old. No, about 8 years old. He said he was 8 years old. And he said before, when the Cossacks used to come in, they protected the Greeks and the Armenians because of their religious connection.
They were Russian,
that's correct.
Russian Orthodox.
That's correct. And during the Tsarist times, the Cossacks used to come across the border whenever the Turks would try to arise and destroy the Greeks or the Armenians. So it had to be then when the Russian Revolution came along, because when that protection went out.
I think what you're saying is that in 1915, 1916 was the Russian-Turkish War.
That's
and
right.
the Russians were occupying that area, which is now called Turkey, which then was called Pontos and Asia Minor Greece. It was historically Greece, always was.
Correct.
And the Russian Revolution began in October 1917.
That's right.
The Russians had to leave, and a tremendous slaughter took place.
That's right.
The world knows that 1 million Armenians were slaughtered.
And in my father's town, 3,000 of them were slaughtered, and they had the little Greek boys, and they were very young. I don't know if my dad was 8, 10 years old, whatever he was, and they had them burying them. And my dad, Mama, I said that, it was 8. And my father and his cousin saw a little jacket on one of the Armenian corpses, and they liked it, so they took it off, and he took it back to his grandmother's, to his mother's house, and she reprimanded him, and he had to go back and put that little jacket back. It was a very sad time for my father, because his father was in Poli, Kapetanopoulos, and they were up there, but his whole family, his original family, except for his dad, they starved to death. Because
your relatives starved
that's
to
right,
death?
they did. And I think he had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and my father was the only survivor, right, Mama?
Yeah.
And Papu. They all perished.
During the 1915,
It had to be,
1922?
that's correct. It had to be during World War I, because Dad was quite young at that time. And there was so much turmoil in the area between the Turks and whatever was going on.
What you're saying, between the Muslim Turks,
That's right.
the Ottomans, against the Christian Armenians, the
That's right.
Greek Orthodox, there was this massacre of people.
Correct.
How do you feel living in the United States when basically hardly any American knows the suffering that the Greeks endured?
It makes me sad in a way, because I think it's a history. Everyone has history in their lineage, but I think this type of history should be remembered, because it's...
Ζήτω και η Αρκαδία οπωσδήποτε. Να ζήσουν τα νησιά. Κανάρι.
Να ζήσει ο Κανάρης.
Listening in, who joined us, Katerina, whose ancestors also were in that part of the Greek world, which is now called Turkey.
Right.
And why don't you tell us why you're sitting down now with us?
My father and mother told us that, especially my mother, she said that the only reason my father got to live, all 7 brothers were killed by the Turks. And his mother was a widow, and she took whatever jewels she had, and she ran with him and put him on a boat. And that's how he was saved. And he come over, and then he come back to get my mother, and then he went back again to America. But she said after he left, there were so many atrocities. All his relatives were killed, all her relatives, her brother. And she said the day she was leaving, her sister-in-law was pregnant, and the Turks put a sword right through her stomach. Yeah, I know. Right in front of her.
There we go. Keep following. A lot of Americans just know about ancient Greece. They don't know about modern Greece, and the survival and the struggle is just as great now as ever. And you are a Pontian Greek who has a history that is very intense that very few people know about. Can you tell us where you're from in the Pontos and what suffering has taken place in your family?
My name is Konstantinos Psylandis. I'm born in Russia. My parents left Trapezunda, Pontos, to Russia, the city of the Russia called Novorossiysk. Of course, my father told me why the reason he moved from Russia. The Hassan Aga, one of those Antarctic, as they call it, guerrillas, they slaughtered in this particular city 10,000 Greeks.
What year are we talking about?
We're talking about in 1915. And of course, my parents, they hired Armenian people in the basement to save them, because that Hassan Aga, he slaughtered even the small child and older people and women.
Who was in the basement?
The Armenians. They put the Armenians in the basement to save them from the Turks, because they are, for the Greeks it was lenient. They went against the Armenians in the beginning.
Who went against?
The Turks, of course.
Yeah, because the Armenians and the Greeks were Orthodox Christians.
Yeah, of course, yes, and very close together because the religion reason and so many other reasons, of course. And that's why my parents, after that, he left Turkey, Trapezunda, and moved to Russia. And that's happened. I born in there, and then I moved from Russia in 1925 to Greece.
Jason of the Argonauts ventured to Kolkis, which is in that area of Russia, the Crimea. So that was part, the Black Sea was like a Greek lake at that time with Greek settlements surrounding the Black Sea coast. There were Greek settlements all around there. So that was a part of Greece. The Greeks traded with the Crimea, bringing in corn and wheat from that area.
interesting is that during World War I, evidently the Greeks didn't want to fight with the Turks. So the Turkish were trying to recruit them in their military. And they would go to the villages, the Greeks would run away, the ones that were born in Turkey. And, naturally...
Occupied Greece.
And occupied, correct. So they would go into the towns and they would take the mothers and beat them. Beat them. And she could tell you stories.
Like έκπλεν, τη μάμα ήταν like έκπλεν. Να πει που είναι ο γιος της. Δεν ξέρω. Και τον είχε κρυμμένο η κακομοίρα κάτω σε ένα αυτό. Δεν ξέρω. Περνούσε από το σπίτι μας και η μάμα μου λέει, πάει στη μάμα της, λέει, μανούλα μου, λέει, να δεις την τριτσόνινα, λέει. Σαν τη μιλιτζάνα είναι. Από πίσω το κοντάκι. Παμ. Και μια γριά γυναίκα την είχαν μαύρη, αλλά δεν είπε το παιδί της, γιατί δεν τους φάζανε μπροστά της. Άλλη μία πήγαινε και αυτό ήταν κρυμμένο απάνω στο ταβάνι. Και τον ήβρανε. Τον πήρε η τφίκια. Τον κατεβάσανε κάτω και τον πήγανε στην πλατεία. Και τον είχαν εκεί να περνάνε όλος ο κόσμος να τον βλέπει. Έτσι θα σας κάνουμε όλοι, αν δεν πείτε πού είναι κρυμμένοι όλοι, να τις σκοτώσουμε.
To Bill, who works here in Tappan Springs. He's first generation, and his father came from Asia Minor, Greece. I believe you said he was from Smyrna. And you grew up hearing a lot of stories.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us about that?
I remember when I was a child, my father had tattooed, they had numbers tattooed on his forearm, 4 numbers, I believe it was.
Can you show us where it was?
I believe it was right here. It was 4 numbers, I don't remember the numbers, and he said that he was a prisoner in Smyrna, and he fled Smyrna to go to Mytilene to get away from the Turkish killings that were going on there, yes.
This is, you told me about this, and I had trouble understanding it because very few people, I think, have heard the story of Greek people that had tattoo numbers. How many digits was it?
4 digits.
4
digits.
And what did your dad explain to you about that?
He said, I can't remember the name, it's Malatos or something like that, which means prisoner. That he was, they said that he would have to serve in the Turkish army, and he didn't do that. He left that country and went to Mytilene.
What other things did he tell you about Turkish authorities or any Turkish names?
He mentioned the name Mustafa Kemal all the time. I don't know who that person is, but he mentioned that name.
Did he seem angry about that?
Yes, he did. Yes.
There were a lot of people your parents' age who came from what they call the Chamenes Chodes, the lost parts of Greece, who didn't tell their first-generation children about these massacres and destructions because they say to me they didn't want their children to worry. They wanted them to grow up in the United States and not be aware of these terrible stories. But what did your father do?
He more or less, he didn't mention anything. Only, he would mention that name all the time, prisoner, and mention the numbers, and that was about it. I was very young then. If he said much, I don't remember.
Well, when you heard these stories, were there any other places to back them up, or could you tell any of your American friends these stories, or did it all seem unbelievable to you?
Well, it seemed unbelievable to me.
Tell us a story now from your dad, apparently, who lived in the area.
He lived up near Trapezunda, but that's in Pontos, in the Pontic Mountains, and there was a town near them. And when the Greek people in that town would speak Greek, the Turks would cut out their tongue, and they would speak Turkish, and they still, as much as their tongue, they would make guttural sounds, and they would say elas zi, and that's why they call them lazi, because that means Greece is alive. But this was not during the 20th century. This was older times, maybe in the 1800s, 1700s, and people from that area, from the history that I learned from a Greek general, said they were left there mostly by Alexander the Great's armies, and they set up their villages there, and they never migrated anywhere else. And they speak a dialect, even to this day. If you go up into Thrace, you feel the Greeks speak a dialect of ancient Greek, and it was due to the fact that they were left there and they weren't integrating with anyone else. And they were, again, as I had mentioned before, during the Tsarist times, they were near the border, and the Turkish Cossacks would come across every time the Turkish armies or gangs or whatever would start trying to annihilate the Greeks or the Armenians, and they were protected for a long period of time.
The Russian Cossacks?
The Russian Cossacks, and my father said the Turks were terrified of them. Terrified.
Yeah.
But once, did you hear that story too?
Yeah, my dad told us.
Okay, but once the revolution came along and the Bolsheviks took over, well, then everything was free game. And that's truly, I think, why they got to slaughter as many people as they did. I think if the Russians had been as they were before under Tsar or under the religious spectrum, they would have probably helped them. And there wouldn't have been this bloodshed that was... Because my father told me stories over and over again how the Cossacks would come in and they were like a welcome relief to the Greeks and Armenians.
Well, one of the things the Serbs and the Russians and the Greeks had in common was the Orthodox Christian religion.
Right.
And of course they were always at odds with the Muslims.
Right.
Correct.
And I understand the Muslim religion was founded in 585 AD, after the death of Christ.
Yes.
And of course Byzantium and the Greek Christian and the Christian church was founded with St. Paul teaching in Thessaloniki, Macedonia, Greece. So we have this tremendous religious war that hardly any American knows anything about.
In 1915, and a very good source for this is Marjorie Housepian. The destruction of Smyrna is a wonderful source for understanding just what kind of an impact the Armenian slaughter had on the world and how it impacted on Hitler, who was known to say in late 1930s, when he was talking about his plan to wipe out the Jews, who talks about the Armenians? That's totally forgotten. So let's go on and do what we want to do with the Jews. In 1915, 1.5 million, conservatively, were slaughtered by the Turks, Armenians. Later on, 1916 through 18, out of 750,000 Pontic, P-O-N-T-I-C Greeks on the Black Sea, half of that population was slaughtered, 350,000, in another ethnic cleansing operation by the Turks. And what they wanted to do was create, in Kemal Atatürk's own words, a Turkey for the Turks. We want Turkey to be for the Turks. And they slaughtered at that time, because Kemal did not play a role at that time. They slaughtered half of the Pontic population, the other half disappearing into the Caucasus, into Russia, to escape the slaughter and the massacre. And then, of course, the great debacle, that great massacre, the modern-day falling of Constantinople, the second-day tragedy, the second greatest tragedy ever to befall the Greeks. And that was what happened to us in the Greco-Turkish War 1919-1922, when the entire Armenian population, many of the Greeks, thousands of the Greeks, hundreds of thousands, were slaughtered by the Turks in that great war.
And that, some people say 2 million Greek people were slaughtered between 1915 and 1922. However, a lot of the Greeks are upset because they fought in the First World War I for the Allies. And when it came time, and they were encouraged even, I believe, by the English and the French initially to move deep into interior Turkey, Anatolia, and some Greek people of the time feel betrayed because they feel that, what have you heard about that possible betrayal?
Well, in my opinion, there were two great events that happened that led to our downfall in Asia Minor. The one was the fact that Lloyd George lost the elections in England. Lloyd George was a great admirer and a great fan of Venizelos, Eleftherios Venizelos. Venizelos could do no wrong in Lloyd George's eyes. His government, which was a liberal government, was replaced by a conservative government who felt that they had overextended themselves in Asia Minor and that they had to, under public pressure in England at the time, withdraw and pull out and let the financial and the industrial and the mercantile interests take over, which is what happened. The other was the elections of, my memory doesn't fail me, 1922, where Constantine was elected, brought back. King Constantine Venizelos lost the elections and King Constantine was brought back. And the English and the Allies had already warned the Greeks that if you bring back the pro-German Constantine, you can no longer expect our help. So a lot of it was caused by the election, the fall of Venizelos, and the election, the fall of Lloyd George.
Notwithstanding this election result, some people consider it inhumane that British and French ships were in the harbor of Smyrna, and when thousands of Greeks, the ocean ran red with blood due to the slaughter. And is it your information and knowledge that the British and the French did nothing to save the dying Greek population?
All sources have been really suppressed on this matter. We've got books that talk about that great slaughter and how we were betrayed by our allies. And yes, the Allies were in the harbor, loaded down with samples. Esso distilleries, the Esso refinery rather, on the north end of the harbor was spared magically. The Turkish portion of the town was spared magically. The rest of the town was burned to a crisp. But we actually had people on shipboard waiting to get off to bring their samples to Kemal Atatürk and to begin talking about business ventures. We were betrayed, there's no doubt about it.
And there are all kinds of stories of the water, the ocean being bloodied and turned red with baby bodies floating in the water.
Right. Ο θείος μου, της μάμας μου αδερφός, ήταν εκεί και κρυβόταν και έβλεπε. Το boardwalk ήταν στη θάλασσα και ήταν γεμάτο κόσμος να πάει να μπει στα βαπόρια, να τους γλιτώσουν τα γαλλικά που ήταν εκεί και έσπασε και πέσανε όλοι κάτω, μόνο στο νερό. Περπατούσαν πάνω από τα πτώματα, γέμωσε η αποβάθρα. Και οι Γάλλοι βάζανε τα χοχλαστά νερά, τα very hot water και ζηματούσαν τον κόσμο να μην πάει στο βαπόρι. Μετά ο θείος μου και έκλαιγε και η γυναίκα του, αυτοί υποφέρανε στη Σμύρνη. Ναι, και ένα μόνο Ιαπωνέζικο βαπόρι βάρδισε, έριξε κανονιές και πήρε τόσο κόσμο πάνω στο βαπόρι του και γλίτωσε. Οι Γάλλοι, οι Άγγλοι, οι Ιταλοί, όλοι ήταν εκεί, δεν κάναν τίποτα, μόνο γελούσαν που πέφτανε τα πτώματα στη θάλασσα. Περπατούσαν από τα πτώματα, σου λέει. Εμείς περπατούσαμε όλη τη νύχτα με το φιγάρι, καλά και έφυγε και πέφταμε μέσα στα βάρτα εκεί. Τραβούσε ο ένας τον άλλον να πάμε. Ήταν οι καρποζιές.
Watermelon patches.
Να καθίσουμε, λέει, να ξεκουραστούμε, είπανε όλοι. Η μάμα μου, πριν να φύγουμε από το, κατάλαβε η μάμα μου, γιατί ήταν οι άλλοι πρόσφυγες στη Σάμο ερχομένοι και λέει, θείο, του λέει της μάμας του στον αδελφό, εσύ Σούμέκερ, πάρε μερικά tools, γιατί άμα πας στη Σάμο να ψάχνεις τα παπούτσια, είχε, δεν ξέρω πώς τα λέγανε αυτά, πολύ κουφτερά μαχαίρια. Και Τα είχε εκεί. Η μάμα μου πήγε να περάσει και έκοψε το πόδι από εκεί. Ούτε οι γιατροί, ούτε τίποτα. Οι κάλτσες κουλήσαν απάνω, τα φορέματά της, όλη τη νύχτα να πάμε στη σπηλιά να φύγουμε για τη Σάμο. Ερχόταν τα καΐκια, άλλοι νηστικοί από εκεί, λέει έχετε να μας πληρώσετε. Λέει, ωραία, τι θέλετε να πάρετε, ό,τι έχουμε, λέει, γυμνοί φύγαμε, δεν έχουμε ρούχα, τίποτα. Άλλοι δεν παίρνουν. Η μάμα μου μέχρι εδώ μπήκε, σήκωνε ένα παιδί και θα σας πληρώσω, λέει. Πάρτε τα χρυσαφικά μου, το λέω και θέλω να πάρτε και να γλιτώσω, λέει, τα παιδιά μου. Έδωκε τα χρυσαφικά για να μας βάλουν στα καΐκια. Δεν μας βάζανε αν δεν πληρώνανε. Αλλά μέχρι εδώ το νερό έβγαινε έξω, έπαιρνε ένα παιδί, το πήγαινε του καΐκι και μας πήγανε στη Σάμο. Άλλοι δεν είχαν, μείναν εκεί, άλλοι πνίγανε, άλλοι σφάξανε. Ο θείος μου πήρε 3.000 αρνιά, είχε πάδια. Πήγε από την άλλη σπηλιά να τα περάσει στο βαπόρι. Τα πήρε, νοικίαση, κατάστρεψη, χρήματα. Πήγε στη Μακεδονία, έπεσε, έγανε και στη Σάμο. Αν είχατε χρήματα, λέει, και πλούσιοι θα φέρατε. Βρε, λέει, άμα έγινε όμως, δεν ξέρω τι έρεκε, και ήρθαν μερικά τουρκικά αερόπλανα, της λέει, μάμα μου, τι μπορείτε να πάρετε τώρα, τίποτα, λέει, τα παιδιά μου. Και εμείς, λέει, αυτό κάναμε από τη Μικρά Ασία. Τα παιδιά μας πήραμε, να γλιτώσουμε τα παιδιά μας, λέει. Ναι. Αυτά ήταν τα βάσανα, σκοτωμοί. Όλο κρύβομάσταν, η μάμα μας έπαιρνε από το ένα σπίτι στο άλλο νύχτα. Απόψε θα βάλουν σφαΐ στα χωριά. Άιντε, εκεί αντί να μεγαλώσουμε εμείς γατζώναμε. Λαδάκι είναι καμψίλι. Από τι, ψωμίνο, φόβο με καντάρια. Πώς θα μεγαλώναμε εμείς. Εδώ μεγαλώνουν, βέβαια, τώρα τα παιδιά μεγαλώνουν γιατί έχουν το καλύτερο φαγητό. Πού, πλαέζαμε και λέγαμε ψωμί. Πού ψωμί, τίποτα. Η μάμα μου άγγει το αυτό και λέει, να παιδιά μου, λέει, δεν έχω, τι να σας δω. Έκλαιε και κλαίγαμε εμείς ψωμί. Αδελφή μου ήταν η μωρό, λέει, ψωμί θέλω. Στο τέλος, και αρχίζει και το ξύλο και μας έδινε. Έχουμε υποφέρει τα πάντα από αυτήν, τσι Τούρκοι, τσι βάρβαρ Τούρκοι. Βάρβαρ, πολύ βάρβαρ φιλιά είναι οι Τούρκοι. Δεν υποφέρουν.
Πώς αισθάνετε εσείς τώρα? How do you feel now that with the crisis with Yugoslavia, it seems like the United States government is supporting the Muslims against the Serbian Christians, and they're not doing anything in the United
I'd like to say that aside from Housepian's book, which is an excellent source if you want to learn about what happened, the great tragedy, the vice consul to Smyrna, the American vice consul, Horton, who was a Philhellene, who loved the Greek people, who saw what went on, wrote 2 books titled The Blight of Asia, #1. The other book was Reminiscences, Grave and Gay. I would recommend looking that book up in the library. And then Bierbach's book, The Great Betrayal, talks about how we were stabbed in the back by our allies. Yes, we made mistakes, but we did not deserve the treatment that we got at the hand of our allies, the hands of our allies. The Greek people, the Greek army, had been fighting for 25 years through the Slavic wars, the Macedonian wars, the wars with Bulgaria. They were tired. The Greek nation was almost bankrupt. Yet in 1921, September, we pushed the Turks all the way back almost to the Konya area, which is a very large area. We conquered that entire area. Had we dug in then, we could have maintained Smyrna. We could have maintained Eastern Thrace. Had we not proceeded out to Sangarios, had we not gone toward Ankara, we would have made it. We would have done. We've made mistakes, but we did not deserve the break we got.
But a lot of people argue, who are familiar with that and have lived it, that the British, the French, and even the Italians encouraged the Greek army to go deep in, and then the reports are that they cut off the weapons and the supplies.
Yes, that's perfectly true, but the Italians never encouraged. In fact, the Italians were quite upset over the fact that the Adana area, which had been promised to them, was later denied by the English and re-promised to the Greeks. So the Italians were never for the Greeks landing in Asia Minor, to my knowledge. The French never really actively encouraged us. It was always the English who were behind us because of Lord George, because the English have a history of Philhellenism, and because Lloyd George was a great believer in Venizelos. He felt that we could hang on to that portion of Greek territory, which has been Greek for thousands of years, and the Italians and the French were the first to turn against us and begin to negotiate with the communists up in Russia and with Ataturk in Samsun, where his headquarters
Many
were.
people feel that the slaughter that took place for the Armenians and then for the Greeks from 1915 to 1922 all occurred because of the Russian Revolution in October 1917. The Cossack army had to return back to Moscow, and it left defenseless. It allowed the Turks to start their campaign of slaughter.
Ataturk made deals with the communists, was supplied with arms by the communists and the French. There can be no doubt of that whatever. During the slaughter and the burning and the massacre of Smyrni, houses flying the French and our Italian flags were left alone. So that tells you just what happened at that
What about
period.
the Jewish population?
The Jewish population was left relatively alone. They came through it unscathed. For some reason, Ataturk turned all of his frenzy and his madness primarily against the Armenians first and the Greeks second. What happened to Chrysostomos, and it is to our great shame that in this day and age we do not have Chrysostomos Smyrnis as a saint. We are afraid. Is it because we're afraid of the Turkish government today?
This is the patriarch.
The patriarch, the man who was slaughtered, who had taken part in the Macedonian struggle, who was transferred to Smyrni, and who was by Nureddin Bey left to his death. He was told at the balcony of the customs house of the Konak. He came out on the balcony and said to the Turks milling about below, he pointed to the Archbishop and said, give him what he deserves. And we all know what happened to the Archbishop.
Well, a lot
after
of
that.
people don't know what happened.
Well, he was slaughtered. His ears were cut off. His tongue was cut off. His genitals were pushed into his mouth. He was shaved. He was stabbed. He was left covered, smeared with dog offal, and left there. That's what happened to Chrysostomos Smyrni, a saint in my eyes. And yet today, is it because the Greek government fears the Turks that we don't pronounce this man a saint? He is not part of our initial...
Well, let it be known from this moment.
Our official catalog of saints? I don't know. But all of these things happened at that time. They were the real Holocaust, which is a Greek word, olokaftoma, which can be found inscribed in marble on the island of Delos. The first Holocaust was not the Jewish Holocaust. The first Holocaust of the 20th century was the Armenian Holocaust. After that was the Pontic Holocaust, and after that was the Holocaust of the Greeks and the Armenians in
And the
Smyrna.
word Holocaust means total consumption by fire.
Yeah, exactly. Olokaftoma.
Και τώρα the Hellenic Cultural Center Προμηθέας. Ο Προμηθέας, το πολιτιστικό μας κέντρο, παρελάβουν τα παιδιά, το μέλλον της Προμηθέας, οργανωμένα με τα μπούρλα τους και τις εθνικές τους ενδυμασίες. Χειροκροτή για αυτάς!
Now marching is our Kalimnos, the Kalymnian Society, one of the most beautiful islands of Greece, in front of us. We declare that Emia are Greek, and we will fight for them if necessary.
Ζήτω η Καλυμνός μας!
Και ο πατέρας μου φύγαν διωγμένοι ούτε περιουσίες, ούτε ρούχα. Τα χάσαν όλα διωγμένοι και πηδώντας μέσα στη θάλασσα. Άλλοι πνιγήκανε, άλλοι βγήκαν ζωντανοί, χαθήκαν αναμεταξύ τους από τις οικογένειές τους. Περάσαν νυχτρά χρόνια και μέχρι το 40 του πολέμου που ήρθε ο πόλεμος ύστερα, ακόμα δεν είχαν ανασάνει και ακόμα μπορούμε να πούμε η Ελλάδα μας δεν μας αφήνουν να ανασάνουμε.
Από πού ακριβώς ήταν οι συγγενείς σου?
Από τη Μικρά Ασία, ο πατέρας μου από το Τουρμπαλί της Μύρνης και η μαμά μου από τα Ιντίνη.
Είναι σωστά τι έχουμε ακούσει που λένε τις τελευταίες μέρες εκεί πέρα, ο κόσμος πέφτηνε στη θάλασσα, ήτανε καράβια και τι έγινε?
Ο κόσμος μπουλούκια, όσους μπορούσαν μπαίνανε στη θάλασσα για να πάρουν τα καράβια, τις βάρκες και να πάνε στα ελληνικά νησιά και στην Ελλάδα.
Και οι Γάλλοι τους ρίχνανε ζυματιστά νερά από πάνω. Οι Γάλλοι τους ρίχνανε ζυματιστά νερά από πάνω να μην
ανεβαίνουν. Και πνιγόντουσαν ο κόσμος. Και δώσ' του, όσοι μπορούσαν με νύχια και με δόντια ανεβήκανε και σωθήκανε. Άλλοι κολυμπώντας, άλλοι ύστερα μέσα στην Τουρκία, ώσπου να φτάσουν στο λιμάνι, τους φάζανε, τους σκοτώνανε.
Ποιος ακριβώς? Λένε οι σύμμαρχοι τα καράβια ήταν εκεί. Τι έγινε?
Οι σύμμαχοι μας ρίχνανε νερά από πάνω, ζυματιστά για να μην ανέβουν οι συγγενείς μας απάνω. Και στο τέλος πια φτάσανε. Άλλοι μισοί, άλλοι χαθήκανε, άλλοι μέχρι τώρα ακόμα ψάχνουν.
Άλλοι Γάλλοι τους βοηθήσαν και
εγώ θυμάμαι η μαμά μου είχε πει ότι είχε μεγάλη περιουσία στη Μικρά Ασία και τα αφήσανε όλα λιτά δεμένα και τα αφήσανε και μείνανε φτωχοί, πάμφτωχοι και αρχίσαμε από το Α στην Ελλάδα και ακόμα δεν μπορούμε να ορθοποδήσουμε. Όσοι είχαν δαχτυλίδια στα χέρια τους, οι Τούρκοι δεν τους παίρνανε τα δαχτυλίδια, απλώς τους κόβανε τα δάχτυλα. Όσοι είχαν σκουλαρίκια στα αυτιά τους, τους κόβανε τα αυτιά. Τις κοπέλες τις νέες τις παίρνανε και τις βιάζανε οι Τούρκοι. Και η μαμά μου, επειδή ήταν 18 χρονών, ξύρισε τα φρύδια της, εντύθηκε γριά και πήγε μέσα στο καράβι για να μπορέσει να έρθει στην Ελλάδα.
Από μνήματα πήδαγε για να περάσει και να πάει στην Ελλάδα.
Οι Τούρκοι είναι οι μεγαλύτεροι μας εχθροί και πρέπει να τιμωρηθούν.
Είναι βάρβαρος λαός.
Πρέπει να βρούμε το δίκιο μας, όχι να τους υπερασπίζει ο Αμερικανικός λαός. Εμείς είμαστε Αμερικανοί, εδώ είμαστε τώρα Αμερικανοί πολίτες, αλλά την πονάμε την πατρίδα μας. Είμαστε Έλληνες.
Όπως πονάμε την Αμερική.
Πρώτα Έλληνες και μετά Αμερικανοί.
Το πράγμα είναι, πες ακριβώς από πού ήταν η μάνα σου από αυτές τις άσχημες ημέρες το 22, πού ήτανε?
Ήτανε στα Σόκια, στη Σμύρνη.
Και λένε πως ήταν 22 καράβια σύμμαρχοι εκεί πέρα, Ιγγλέζοι, Γάλλοι, Ιταλοί και Αμερικάνοι, και είναι άλλες ιστορίες, είναι σωστό ή δεν είναι. Λένε πως κόβανε τα χέρια να μην μπουν στα καράβια.
Αυτό ήταν αλήθεια. Και οι σύμμαχοι οι ίδιοι δεν μας υπερασπίσανε, δεν αγαπάνε την Ελλάδα. Ίσως δεν μας αγαπάνε επειδή είμαστε ξύπνιος λαός και φοβούνται μην τυχόν και τους πάρουμε τα σκύπτρα. Αλλά η Ελλάδα δεν θα πεθάνει ποτέ, ό,τι και να μας κάνουν. Ό,τι και να μας κάνουν.
Μπράβο, ένα πράγμα όμως, είναι μεγάλο παράξενο όμως, περίμενε να ρωτήσουμε, γιατί μιλάμε για το 22, αλλά δεν είναι σωστά πως η Ελλάδα ήταν σύμμαρχη με την Αγγλία και την Αμερική και την Γαλλία με το πρώτο πόλεμο. Πώς μπορεί να γίνει 5 χρόνια μετά να μην μας βοηθάνε εκεί στη Μικρά Ασία? Δεν το καταλαβαίνω.
Δεν ξέρουμε.
Και ακόμα δεν μας βοηθάνε. Λένε ότι μας βοηθάνε, αλλά και ακόμα δεν μας βοηθάνε.
Τους Τούρκους βοηθάνε και τώρα.
Γιατί δεν ξέρουμε. Ίσως
παλαιοτά των χρόνων η ιστορία μας λέει πάντα πως μας βοηθάνε και από πίσω μας βρίσκονται πάντα και οπισθοχωρούν αντί να μας βοηθάνε. Είτε η Ρωσία ήταν η Αμερική ήταν η Αγγλία ήταν. Όλοι λέγανε πως ήταν σύμμαχοι και στο τέλος ρίχνανε αλλού τα πολεμοφόδια και αλλού ήταν ο στρατός μας.
Και ρίχνανε.
Και στο Σαράντα το ίδιο.
Κάτσε, ο μπαμπάς μου είπε, ρίχνανε από πάνω τα αεροπλάνα. Άλλοι δεξιές, αριστερές αρβίλες. Το μυανού δεξιά για να μην μπορούν να βάλουν αρβίλα. Και πήγαιναν ξυπόλυτοι επάνω.
Και νομίζεις πως η Ελλάδα και ο κόσμος πρέπει να έχει γιορτή, να γιορτάζουμε αυτή την ημέρα τώρα? Λένε πως οι Πόντοι έχουν ημέρα, η Μικρά Ασία έχουν ημέρα.
Όχι, αλλά άμα σταματήσουμε να μην θυμόμαστε την ιστορία μας πρέπει να πεθάνουμε. Η ιστορία πρέπει να ζει.
Είμαστε όλοι εδώ σήμερα να κάνουμε αυτό το πράγμα, και η νεολαία μας να μην ξεχάσει τη ιστορία, τι αποφέραμε, γιατί άρχισε η Επανάσταση το 1821 και ακόμα πολεμάμε για την ελευθερία.
while I was born in Smyrna, and a lot of other people were born, there's no more Greeks in Smyrna.
And that you're saying that there were up to 500,000.
Yes, they
This
were.
was one of the largest Greek cities outside of Athens.
That's right.
And there were only 10,000 Turks.
No, we're more than 10,000.
Well, in 1902, when you were born, they were certainly a minority.
Yes, a minority, but they moved to Greece. There's no minority in Turkey of Greek and Armenians and a few Europeans.
Do you want to, was there any danger in Smyrna when you were a teenager? When did the killing start against?
14.
In 1914.
1914, 1915, 1916.
And what started happening?
Well, they were eliminated by killing them or by bringing more Turks. Now Smyrna is a Greek. Before it was a Gaur city, a Greek city. Now it's a Turkish city. There are no Greeks.
When you were born into Smyrna, it was part of the Ottoman Empire.
It still remains a part of the Ottoman Republic.
Yes, but I understand from other sources that they were drafting during the whole 400-year occupation of the Turks. There's been much research and much literature indicating that the Turks used to have a Janissary army. They used to
Janissaries.
Janissaries. They used to take the oldest son.
The young boys and girls, young boys especially, were taken over by the Turks and brought up as Turkish citizens. And they became the Janissary army.
And this Janissary army, correct me if I'm wrong or embellish on it or expand, as I understand it, it was a form of ransom that in order to keep the Greek population quiet and scared, by taking the oldest son, the strongest son, and raising them Turkish, the parents knew that if they made any trouble against the Turks, that maybe their son would be...
They made trouble. They made trouble. They fought it. They fought it, but the Janissaries were really Greek-oriented and Greek-born.
Story that I've heard about the Janissaries is that these boys, of course, who were raised Turkish, were raised not knowing then that they were Greek.
No.
That they were raised Turkish.
That's true. That's true. And they were killing their own people.
Right, and that's what a Janissary army is.
As a rule, the Janissary army was the strongest. They fought against the Greeks.
So it's true then, it's safe to say that these young boys who became Turkish soldiers, not knowing that they were taken as babies,
were knowing or not knowing,
were killing their own...
They were killing their own people.
Killing their own people.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, by most standards in the international community,
It's against the law now.
It's against the law.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. The war, the Armenians joined the Greek army. And when the war was over, the Armenians returned to Smyrna and went back to their work. And the Turkish army wanted them to give themselves up to the Turkish army. Now the Armenians knew that meant that they would be killed. And there was a fire. There was a fire in the Armenian quarters. The church St. Stephan was Armenian. That's where all the former Armenian serving as Greek soldiers in the Greek army were tried to save themselves. And they gave fire to this Armenian church, and the fire extended to the whole city. And that way, the Turks found a way of getting the Greeks out of Smyrna.
They burned down the church.
They burned down everything.
With the
The
inside.
whole Smyrna was burned down.
We hear reports, maybe this is not true, but I have heard that Kemal Atatürk,
Yeah.
the founder of what's
Yeah,
called modern-day,
The father of Turkey, modern Turkey.
which they say the modern-day Turkey was founded in 1923 after this slaughter.
Yeah, it was.
They say that Kemal Atatürk was born in Salonika.
Not they say, it's a fact.
He was born in Salonika.
His house is still saved in Salonika.
Which is the second city of Greece.
That's right.
Now, in 1492, we know that the persecution or the Inquisition in Spain caused thousands, even up to 60,000 Sephardic Jews to come to Salonika.
80,000.
80,000.
Yeah.
And some people
The
have...
Jews were saved by taking, they changed their names into Greek names. And Greece saved about 80,000 Armenians.
Uh-huh. But some reports have it that Kemal Atatürk, who was born in Salonika,
Yes.
was born of a Jewish mother.
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know.
Because
I don't know this story.
Because in Smyrna, now this is, you say there were the Armenian Christians, there were the Greek Christians that made up 500,000 in the time you were born in 1902. But what about the Jewish population in Smyrna? There are some reports that they were left alone.
They were left alone.
Pan over to Faneuil Hall, too. We are here in Boston today, 1995. This is the first Greek Independence Day parade held in Boston to commemorate the heroic Greek struggle for Greek Independence Day.
The Turks, they did. In Minor Asia, the same thing they did. They used to take the boys from the mothers. They used to raise them as Turks, and they used to be the worst fighters against the Greeks because they didn't know where they come from.
Macedonia, Greece. Are any of your relatives from Thraki or Anatolia Thraki?
My father comes from Minor Asia. He was also, his father was killed by the Turks. And my grandmother brought my father to Greece. He was like 8 years old, orphan, with my grandmother. And they settled up in Seres, which is the north part of Macedonia.
The Greeks were involved in a bit of war with the Turks in Pontos and Asia Minor.
Pontos and Asia Minor.
And 2 million Greeks people...
That were massacred by the Turks. And also when the Greeks tried to go near the big, ships that they were supposed to take them to Greece because they didn't know where to go. The big, powers that time, the French, the British, the Germans, and the Italians. America was not so strong at the time. They didn't allow them. Some of the soldiers of these, big powers, they tried to cut their hands when they tried to go inside the walls.
We've heard these stories many times, especially the British and the French. The slaughter of Asia Minor in Smyrna.
That's from where my father was, from Smyrna.
Αλλά είναι μικρότερη από μένα. I am 93 years old.
Why don't you say it in English? Go ahead.
Yeah. And I remember very well what I have seen like a movie representation. So I'll address everybody who wants to learn details to my book. Because of my age, there are details I can't recollect, but in my books it's everything in great detail, and everybody can understand perfectly right the meaning of the catastrophe.
Is it safe to say it was a catastrophe or it was genocide?
Both.
Mm-hmm. Because we know there was the Armenian genocide.
Well, Armenians and Greeks have the branch of the Turkish fanaticism, because it was a fanaticism, an Islamic fanaticism against the Christians. That's why the Christianity was extinguished from Asia Minor.
And
there are many millions of Armenians and Greeks who were butchered at that time.
How could this happen when Greece fought with the Allies in World War I? This was right after. How can this is? I don't understand.
Well, this is the tragic of the catastrophe, because in the harbor of Smyrna there were 22 huge big battleships of 4 countries: England, France, Italy, and United States. And although they were Christian countries, helped the Turks, not the Greeks. That's why the catastrophe was done. If they said only to the Turks that I will start bombing you, they would have stopped immediately. The catastrophe and the conflagration won't happen. But unfortunately, those 4 Christian nations helped the Turks because they had great interest in Turkey. But Jews were always taking part with the party who had the interest, and the Jewish leaders helped the Turks at that time. And whoever was Turk in the Turks was welcome. That's why they permitted the Jew to remain in the Turkish soil.
Της μάμας μου ο αδελφός κρυβούνταν από το στρατό, δεν ήθελε να πάει να πολεμήσει. Και τον πιάσανε. Με το κοντάκι το λένε, το φέκι από πίσω, παμ, παμ. Η μια ήταν από πάνω και κοίταζε. Ποιανού παιδί είναι αυτό, λέει. Από κάτω από τα πόδια του το Τούρκο περνούσε έτσι. Είναι άμα να ζήσεις, έζησε φτωχός. Και τον εφέραμε εμείς εδώ στην Αμερική.
Her uncle.
Ναι, τη μάμας μου ο αδελφός. Το ξύλο που έφαγε αυτός ο άνθρωπος, μιλιτζάνα, λες θα τηλέψει. Από Τσιτούρκη θα χωνέψει Τσιτούρκη, θα μου πείτε. Ούτε κρυμασμένοι να τις δω θα λύσουν το σκηνή να πέσουν. Διότι μας ξύσανε στη σούβλα, σαν να το φέρνουν βόλτα να συψένουν έτσι. Μικρά παιδιά τρέμαμε, Τούρκοι έρχονται, τι πόρτες, μια κλωτσά την πόρτα, να τα σφαιριά, αυτές τις σφαίρες είχαν έτσι. Πού τριμούλα, σαν δεν πεθάναμε κι όλα. Μακάρι, τι να κάναμε. Συγκοπή καρδιά είχαμε. Η μάμα μου θα μας μάδευε σαν την κότα με τα πουλάκια. Λέει, παιδάκι μου, θα μας σκοτώσει απόψε, παιδάκι μου, να πάμε στο θείο του σπίτι να μείνουμε. Μια βραδιά λέει, δεν θα πάμε πουθενά, λέει. Εδώ θα καθίσουμε και άμα μας σκοτώσει, ας μας, τι από το ένα σπίτι λέει, θα πηγαίνουμε κάθε βράδυ, λέει, να έρχονται οι αραπάδες, άγριοι Τούρκοι, με τα σφαίρες έτσι, και πω πάνω, τι έβλεπες και έβγαινε η ψυχή σου. Αυτά θα λυπηθώ εγώ της Τούρκια, Παναγία μου. Να μου πούνε το τελευταίο μου έτσι εδώ να γλιτώσω αυτήν θα το δω να ξεκουμπιστούν αυτήν από εκεί. Να ξεκουμπιστούν ακόμα, τι Τούρκοι θα βοηθήσουμε ακόμα. Δεν είμαστε χριστιανοί, η Αμερική δεν είναι χριστιανοί, τι είναι.
Έχουν όλοι μάμα, δεν είναι αυτό τώρα,
γιατί θέλει να τη δώσουν τη Μακεδονία στην Τουρκία, γιατί είναι η Τουρκία. Τόσα χρόνια εγώ από τότε που αισθάνομαι είμαι 80 χρονών και ξέρω τι λένε Μακεδονία, δεν ξέρω τι λένε Τουρκία.
The point about the religion in the area, I believe that Dreyfus and Disraeli in 1878, the Prime Minister of England was Jewish.
Oh yes, Disraeli, yes.
Yeah, and the Treaty of San Stefano was a treaty engineered by the British and some people believe the Zionists to go against Greek interests in Thrace and Macedonia the northern part of Greece, and even allowed for Bulgaria to take northern Greece. So 50 years before, British foreign policy with a Jewish prime minister was working against Greek interests.
Sir, if you permit me to say so and correct you historically, England, according to Churchill in his memoranda, they have 4 books, said clearly and openly that the English people, especially the English people, and especially the English army, was always pro-Turkish, pro-Turkish. And she made a memorandum sent to the Prime Minister of England saying, what's your step? The Bolshevik will take Mosul and we lose our source of oil. Or they let the Turks become Bolshevik. All this will lead to our losing the oil fields. And England can't live without oil. So be careful, don't go against the Turks.
Churchill wrote this when he was the...
Yeah, in his memoranda, and it's in there, in his memoranda, I don't say myself. It's
and during
written.
1919, he was the Admiral of the Royal Navy.
Yeah, the great Admiral of the English...
But going back to 1492, when the Sephardic Jews of Spain left Spain because of the Inquisition, because they were posing as Catholics, they were posing as Christians, and that led to the Spanish Inquisition. It's alleged that over 60,000 went to Salonika during the brutal Ottoman Turkish occupation of Greece, and other reports are that Kemal Atatürk was actually born in Saloniki, and that possibly his mother might even have been Jewish.
No, it's not possibly. It's fact, a real fact. His father was Turk, but his mother was Jew, and that's why Kemal inherited her mother's mind.
True that is it the bishop, the Greek bishop Chrysothimos of Smyrna?
Yes, it's true.
What is true? Tell me.
That he was killed, that he was shamed, that they took him around the city streets and they called him names.
And
he was a metropolitan.
So
finally they killed him.
They killed him and they tortured him.
Yes, tortured him. After they tortured him, they killed him.
Yes. So will you live?
He's declared by the Greek Church a saint.
Saint Chrysostomos.
Yes.
And
Saint Chrysostomos.
Chrysostomos.
Chrysostomos means golden mouth, good orator.
Golden mouth.
But that was his name.
And was he living there? You remember him as the bishop?
Yes, yes.
The Greek
metropolitan. Metropolitan of Smyrna.
And was he slaughtered and tortured while you were still there?
Yes, he was.
And so that story you can confirm there?
Yes, I confirm it.
Some of these other things were happening.
Smyrna was a special case of a Greek Orthodox church, city, in the many cities of Turkey. Turkey is a very, not progressive, but a very rich country in natural resources. And the Greeks were forced, that's why the refugees came from, to chase them away and force a population exchange. We had to leave. We became refugees. And then we exchanged the population.
The Treaty of Lausanne.
Yes. And the treaty allowed the Greeks to leave from Turkey and go to Greece, and the Turks in Greece came to Turkey.
And if I don't have it wrong, 200,000 Muslims were allowed to stay in Thraki so that the Greek population of Constantinople could stay there.
That's right.
The only trouble with that today is that the Turks are still in Thraki and the Greeks have been driven out of Constantinople.
That's right. Because the Turks did not keep their promise.
And that's a very terrible thing, I think.
It's a terrible thing, but the Allies wanted to protect their own interests. Fort was a Greek city. There were about 500,000 people, Greeks live there. My whole family were there. They came from all the islands and lived in Smyrna because Smyrna was a great city, good city, wonderful city. I'm proud I was born there. But they got us out, and we can't go back.
No, but I think what we need to do, though, is for the memory of all the souls that died, it's our responsibility, I think, and duty to talk about what happened there, so that it doesn't happen in any other city.
Yes.
So this is your book here, huh? I see skulls piled up in the front. The Greek betrayal. Micra Asiatiki Catastrophe to 1922. How were you actually saved then? How did you escape? Did you lose brothers, sisters, relatives?
Oh yes, I did.
Who did you lose?
Well, many of my relatives. So I can't say names now and addresses. To say one little detail is that at that time in Switzerland was the board of the sheds, Allied sheds.
In Switzerland?
In Switzerland.
Geneva?
Geneva, yeah.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was Lloyd George, the English Prime Minister, suggesting to the Allies to let Greeks disembark in Smyrna and take charge for the occupation. Italy was against and France was against. Lloyd George, who had the power and the persuasion at that time, suggested to take Greece to take the charge instead of their own soldiers to be embroiled and be blooded and butchered. And Lloyd George persuaded the Allies to do that. But on the ships, then Wilson, the President of the United States, said to Lloyd George and to the convention, why to stay on board ship and not disembark? Because on board ship is very hard, filled up with soldiers, to last for a long time. Mm-hmm. So Lloyd George suggested to let the Greeks disembark at once. So you see, it's Lloyd George, the then president of the United States of America.
You mean Wilson?
Wilson
suggested that the Greek soldiers disembark.
Yes, excuse me, I am confusing the name. President Wilson was the main reason why the board was persuaded, and he inclined toward the Lloyd George decision. Said yes, I agree, but let the soldiers disembark from
the Greek soldiers.
The Greek soldiers.
From which boats?
Disembark from their own boats, which were filled up with soldiers.
Yeah.
With the expectation that the Allies will let them disembark.
And fight the Turks, their enemies.
Right. Not to fight, to occupy Smyrna.
Κάνανε σκοτωμό, οι έγκυες γυναίκες να μην το μαχαίρι, τα είδαμε με τα μάτια μας, να βγαίνουν τα παιδιά. Έτσι επτέλευε και η μάμα. Είχε μία σπηλιά, λέει, στο Κουσάντας, θα το έχεις από τον πατέρα σου. Και ήταν κρυμμένοι, δεν ξέρω πώς 100 άτομα, μεγάλη σπηλιά. Και η μάμα διψούσε. Σκόθηκε το κορίτσι να πάει να βγάλει νερό. Ντάν τη σκοτώσανε, περιμέναν, ύστερα βγαίνανε οι Τούρκοι. Βγαίνει έξω, Ντάν, βγαίνει έξω, Ντάν, βγαίνει έξω, Ντάν, βγαίνει έξω. Όλη τη σπηλιά, το κόσμο το σκοτώσανε. Λέει, ήτανε να περπατάσει από πάνω από τα πτώματα. Τέτοιο, στο Κουσάντας απ' έξω ήταν. Απελπισία. Και εγώ να γράψω στους Τούρκοι, στο νύπρωμα της δω θα ταραχτώ.
Πότε γεννήθηκες?
Το 14.
Ήσουν 8 ετών.
Yeah. Και γιατί σου λέω μικρά η μάμα μου αυτό το προσφυγισμό. Υποφέραμε τόσο πολλά στην Τουρκία που σκοτώνανε. Η μάμα μου φεύγαμε από το ένα σπίτι τη νύχτα, πηγαίναμε στο άλλο γιατί θα βάζανε σφαΐ να σφάξουν το χωριό όλο. Αυτή την αγωνία την είχαμε από μωρά παιδιά. Πηγαίνανε στα χωράφια κάτω που είχαν τα αυτά και ήταν ένας παππούς με τα εγγόνια του. Και πάει οι Τούρκοι, οι ηλικιωμένοι και λένε πάρ' τα παιδάκια σου, τα εγγονάκια σου και πήγαινε στο χωριό γιατί θα σε σκοτώσουν όλους. Μα εγώ είμαι ραγιάς θα πεις ήσυχος. Και τι κάνω εγώ. Και να πήγαινε, δεν μπορούμε την νεολαία, οι Τούρκοι τώρα, οι παλαιοί, να τα κρατήσουμε αυτήν την τρελή την νεολαία. Αυτός δεν άκουσε. Έμεινε εκεί. Τη νύχτα πήγανε, σκοτώσαν τον παππού, σκοτώσαν τη γιαγιά, σφάξαν το ένα παιδάκι, το άλλο, κόψαν το λαιμό, δεν τέλεψε. Είχαν και παραγάκια, πώς τα λένε τα παραγάκια.
Little shepherds,
φιλούσαν εκεί. Αυτά πήγανε, ήταν τα κρεμμύδια εκεί, έφορο μέρος. Κρυφτήκαν αυτά, ακούσανε και πήγανε και κρυφτήκαν, δεν τα σκοτώσανε. Ακούγανε το μικρό το ένα, έκλαιγε μέχρι το πρωί. Το πρωί σταμάτησε, τέλεψε, πέθανε. Πήγανε στο χωριό και ειδοποιήσανε, λέει, πηγαίνετε στο τάδι μέρος και τη σκοτώσαν όλοι του παππού, τα εγγόνια όλα. Θυμάμαι που τα φέρανε στη Πατανία τη λιμένα και τρέχαν τα αίματα, τα παιδάκια. Κλαμός και ο δερμός ήτανε. Νεολαία 15-16 χρόνων, τι κάνουμε, λέει, να πάμε κι εμείς να εκδικηθούμε λίγο τους Τούρκους. Σηκωθήκανε και πήγανε.
But still, Greece was better organized. The Greek army was better organized and was defeating the unorganized Turks. Unfortunately, the great allies helped target that, sent to her ammunition, sent her teachers to teach them how to use them. And
that's incredible. You're saying that the allies of the Greeks then turned around and armed and taught and organized the Turkish army to fight the Greeks?
Correct.
That's incredible.
Incredible, but it's true.
That's a betrayal.
That's why I write the big betrayal. It's my last book. It's on the press now, but unfortunately it's in Greece.
So after the Greeks...
It's entitled The Infamy of the Big Betrayal of the Great American Nation.
Bilarakis, the congressman from this district, I believe it's Clearwater, Florida, and I was hoping that you could comment to the American people, Congressman Bilaraki, and inform them on, in terms of foreign policy, what are the key issues that the Americans ought to be concerned about in the Balkans as it relates to their foreign policy vis-a-vis Greece, Turkey, and what have you in the European theater.
Well, obviously, I am a member of Congress and I represent this entire area, both Greeks and non-Greeks alike, but I am biased, and there's no question about that. And I might add, maybe at the beginning here, you said something about the product of my background, and that I'm very, very proud of that. We are what we have been, and the fact that I was raised in a fine Greek family home, very, very religious, very, very concerned about family and each other, and in this particular community where I was born, I wasn't raised here, but came back here. My wife is from here. All that, I think, I know has contributed greatly, along with the help of Christo up above, to my being successful and being in Congress. Insofar as foreign policy is concerned, you know, if the American people would only realize, and I really hate to be picking on another group of people, but if they would only realize that from Albania all the way across what we call Skopje, what some people call Macedonia, and it's not Macedonia, but Skopje and Fyrom they call it, and Bulgaria all the way across to Turkey, that is really an Islamic arc, any way you look at it. And Greece is the only Christian country south of that particular arc, in that particular area. So many people talk about the strategic location of Turkey, and there isn't any question that it is strategic. But my gosh, can you be more strategic than the only Christian country just below that arc, surrounded in effect by that arc? And so that's something that the American people just don't realize. We here in this country, and I'm very proud to be an American, but we're not students of history. We may study it, but we don't really learn by it. And the people just don't realize, unfortunately, and nor do the government officials, and particularly our State Department up there, and I keep pounding the table with them constantly, but they just really, many years ago, they basically placed an awful lot of credibility in Turkey's relationship with the United States, in spite of the fact that Turkey really has not been there when we've needed them over a period of time, over a period of decades. And the fact that now they're supposed to be, if you will, a buffer to the spread of Islamic fundamentalism, when in fact, in my opinion, they're going to be a kickoff point, if you will, to the spread of Islamic fundamentalism. And so it's just critical that the American people realize the role that Greece has always played with the Allies during all of our wars, and of course the role that we very proudly try to remind each other and others, the birthplace of democracy, if you will.
Turkey.
Not Turkey, never was Turkey.
Well, it's called Turkey now, but it never was.
Never was.
Okay.
Never was just Greek. And we live with them and we struggle us. They kill us, they kill our parents, our uncles and grandparents, and they destroy the girls, and they did the worst things in our society.
But why don't the Americans know about this?
Because it's our fault. We have to educate them and tell them what happened. If someone doesn't tell them, they have to tell them. And we have to stand up and talk to them.
Okay, let's have a very special moment of memory here. Tell us something, tell the American people something about your mother and father who were living in Asia Minor, who by 1922, what happened to them?
1922, my father's mother married. The same night, they took my father to the army, and they moved them to the inside, in the inland, you know, and they lost each other. They found each other after 6 months in the island of Lesbos, and they were missing 4 of the brothers and sisters.
What happened to the 4 brothers and sisters?
They disappeared. They disappeared. They killed them. They raped the girls. They killed the boys and the men.
A little bit more. Did your parents lose their businesses, lose everything? What was their understanding on how this happened?
Not only business, everything. They left their houses, their properties, everything. They passed from Asia Minor to the island with a little boat. They were in one little boat, 40 people, 50 people, 10, you know, were sunk in the boat, in the water, and that's it. And they went to Mytilene and they didn't have nothing. They didn't have to eat, they have just their clothes and no shoes, nothing.
And I understand, of course, in World War II, we know that Turkey was not on the side of the Allies one more time.
Of course they were. We fight, and we were to support all, and we help all the society to hold the Germans and stay there next to them. And after that, Turkey has the most important part, and we are nothing.
Okay.
We are not their friends anymore. We are sorry to say that, because we feel that we're supposed to be their friends and not Turkey.
So just one more thing now. Where in Asia Minor were your parents from? And what?
Ayvalik, Chidonia, it's the Greek name, and now the name is Ayvalik.
Ayvalik. And what business did your parents have?
My father was an artist, and she was making artificial flowers, like here they do now with silk. And she had 2 Greek gold medals from Salonika, the international fair.
Okay, and we've heard stories from other people from Asia Minor that the British and the French ships on September 8th, 1922, when the catastrophe culminated with thousands of people dying, babies floating dead in the water.
In Smyrna. They are trying to get people to try to go to the American and English boats, and they cut their hands. They try to take the ropes, and they cut their hands. And the port of Smyrna was red from the blood. And every year now, as far as I know, the Turkish, they celebrate that terrible day, and they cut watermelon and put in the water just to show the terrible thing that they did, and they celebrate for that.
On another item, I know you're at the forefront. After 75 years, I believe you were on C-SPAN speaking on behalf of the Armenian genocide, where they have their anniversary date of April 24th, 1915, talking about the 2 million Armenians that were genocided, but also up to 2 million Pontic and Micra Asia, Asia Minor Greeks. Could you tell the American people what you were trying to tell them to have the American government under a resolution recognize this fact?
Well, you know, we're very familiar with the Holocaust and what happened by the Germans against the Jews, and certainly it did happen, and we're greatly concerned about that. But additionally, we as Americans who care so very much about human rights should be aware of I said earlier that we are what we have been. Well, there are many good people in Turkey. There's no question about it. I think the rank and file are generally good people. But my gosh, the history of these people, and not only their role against Greece and against the United States and the Allies during the wars and whatnot, but also their role over a period of hundreds of years. And the genocide of the Armenians was a large part of that role. And it's just important that we educate the American people and educate many of the Armenian Americans and many of the Greek Americans as to who these people are.
I think the Pontic Greeks have the number of at least 353,000 that were genocided by forced death marches in the summer and the winter till people dropped. That's how they exterminated those people. And then the Asia Minor Greeks, the principal city of Smyrna, that had up to 500,000 people living in it, was finally gutted and burned to the ground. The Greek priest was desecrated, cut into 4 pieces. On September 8th, 1922, this horrible page of world history ends. And I was wondering if it would be okay to have a joint resolution, not only with the Armenians, but also with the Greeks, because the Turks ultimately say it never happened, because apparently in Congress it's never been recognized.
Well, that's right. It's just been recently that has been recognized, and frankly, it's just been the last few years that we've made many members of Congress understand and recognize the problems that the Greeks have had with Turkey over the years. You know, you mentioned Smyrna and the Pontians and whatnot, but you know, our patriarchate is in great danger. constantly they're picking on it and throwing bombs at it and that sort of thing. And our skoli, the school in Halki, which trained many of our priests today and in the past, and hopefully in the future, has been not allowed to be opened by the Turks. And also their rules were to become a patriarch, you must be Turkish born to allow them to become a patriarch. You must be Turkish born. Oh, by gosh, we don't have that many more Greeks left in Turkey and in Constantinople. I was there, as a matter of fact, for the enthronement of our current patriarch, representing President Bush a few years ago. And I mean, we're really a dying breed if, in fact, we can get these people to basically follow the rule of law and to be concerned about the human rights problem. On this banner, back it up. Tell the Americans what Cyprus means to you. Why do we have the red here on the Cyprus map? Tell the Americans.
Since 1974, Turkey occupied Cyprus, occupied half of the island. Since then, they divided the island into two pieces. Cyprus is Greek, and we want Cyprus free. Cyprus, no!
Υπερμάχο στρατηγότα ηχητήρια ως λυτρωθήσαν δίνον ευχαριστήρια, αναγράφος η πόλη σου Θεοτόκε, άλλος έχουσα το κράτος απροσμάχητο, εκπαντίον με κινδύνων ελευθερώσον, ειν ακράζωση και ενήλθει ανήμφευτε. Ζήτω η Ελλάς!
Και τώρα θα κάνουμε την υποστολή της σημαίας. Να. Δεν συγχωρείτε. Ένα χορό για όσους θέλουν που είναι στα χορευτικά να χορέψουν.
Δεν σκέρανε.
Όχι, άλλο μπροστά ή θα κλείσω, δεν πάει, άλλο δεν πάει. Δεν πάει.
Μία φωτογραφία και φεύγατε αμέσως, γλίγορα. Γιώργο, τα κορίτσια από εκεί δεν χορεύουν. Δεν μπορείτε να... Ρε παιδιά, που θα πάμε τώρα. Αν δεν υπάρχει φιλότιμο καθόλου. Δεν παρακαλώ, πέρασε από εκεί. Πρέπει λιγάκι να αφήσουμε... Δεν υπάρχει.
Άλλο, για κάτι πρέπει να ανοίξουνε.